Hello, Bruvs. We're back with Near to the Wild Heart by Clarice Lispector, Chapter 9, Octavio, Part 4. There's little breaks in the sections. This is the fourth little break, the beginning of the fourth little section. Yes, it's true. I threw the book at him, Joanna replied in answer to Otavio's question. He tried to get the upper hand, but that's not what you told the old man. No, I lied. Otavio stared at her, looked in vain for some remorse, for some sign of confession. Only after having lived more or better shall I succeed in discounting what is human, Joanna sometimes told him. Human, me, human, people taken separately as individuals. I must forget them all because my relations with them can only be sentimental. If I go in search of them, I demand or give them the equivalent of those familiar words we are always hearing, fraternity and justice. If they have any real value, it's not because they constitute the apex, but rather the base of a triangle. They are the condition and not the face in itself. Yet they end up by swamping our every thought and emotion because fraternity and justice are unattainable. They are contrary to nature. Despite everything, they are fatal. Given the state of promiscuity in which we live, in this state, hatred transforms itself into love, which never really goes beyond a search for love, never realized except in theory, as in Christianity. Oh, spare me, I can't say his name tonight. Otavio cried out. She would have liked to stop, but wariness and the excitement provoked by the man's presence stimulated her mind, and the words poured out endlessly. Discounting what is human is difficult, she continued, difficult to escape this atmosphere of frustrated revolt, adolescence, this solidarity with men who share the same sense of frustration and failure. Yet, how nice it would be to build something pure, free from false, sublimated love, free from the fear of not loving. The fear of not loving, worse than the fear of not being loved. Oh, spare me, Joanna could hear in Otavio's silence, but at the same time she liked to think aloud, to reason things out spontaneously, simply following her intuition. Sometimes, even for sheer pleasure, she invented arguments. If a stone falls, then that stone exists. There was a force that caused it to fall, a place from which it fell, a place through which it fell. I believe that nothing has escaped the nature of the fact, save for the mystery itself of the fact. But now she was also talking because she did not know how to surrender, and above all, because she merely foresaw, without understanding, that Otavio could embrace her and bring her peace. One night, no sooner had I settled down, she told him, when one of the legs of the bed broke, throwing me on to the floor. After a moment of anger, for I was not even sleepy enough to dispense with comfort, I suddenly thought to myself, why should a bed be intact and not be broken? I got back into bed and was soon asleep. Okay. Sounds like me. She was not pretty. Sometimes it was as if her spirit were abandoning her, only to reveal suspected. Otavio suspected what could never be discovered, even by some superhuman vigilance. On the face that then emerged, the limited and unfortunate traits had no intrinsic beauty. Nothing remained of her former mystery except the color of her skin, milky, somber, elusive. If the moments of abandon prolonged themselves and succeeded each other, then he was amazed at her ugliness, a kind of abasement and brutality, some blind and irrevocable thing that took possession of Joanna's body as if it were decomposing. Yes, I know, Joanna continued. It's like fucking Jimmy Stewart. The distance that separates feelings from words. I've already thought about this, and the most curious thing of all is that the moment I try to speak, not only do I fail to express what I am feeling, but what I am feeling slowly transforms itself into what I am saying, or at least what makes me act is certainly not what I am feeling, but what I am saying. He had no sooner met her than she told him about the old man, told him about the bitch expecting pups, and suddenly alarmed, he had felt as if he had just made a confession, as if he had revealed to that stranger the story of his entire life. What life? The one that struggled inside him and that was nothing, he repeated to himself, afraid of appearing before his own eyes as being self-important and burdened with responsibilities. He was nothing, nothing, and was therefore free to do nothing, he repeated to himself, his eyes mentally shut, as he had told Joanna what he could only perceive in the dark, as if he told. Let me read that again. As if he had told Joanna what he could only perceive in the dark. And most surprising of all, as if she had listened and then laughed, pardoning him, not like God, but like the devil, opening wide gates to allow him to pass. Especially when he had touched her, he had understood. Whatever might follow between them would be irredeemable. Why am I having such a hard time with this? Irremediable. Irremediable. For when he had embraced her, he had felt her come alive in his arms like running water, and seeing her so alive, he had understood, overwhelmed and secretly pleased, that if she loved him, there was nothing he could do. And that moment when he had finally kissed her, he had felt himself to be suddenly free, pardoned beyond what he knew of himself, pardoned in what lay beneath everything he was. What lay beneath everything he was. I don't know if that's clunky. From then onwards, there was no choice. He had plunged giddily from Lydia to Joanna. Knowing this helped him to love her. It was not difficult. On one occasion, she had become distracted looking through the window pane, her lips parted, oblivious of herself. He had called her in the gentle, forlorn manner in which she had turned her head and said, "Eh?" had made him fall into himself, sinking into a foolish and obscure wave of love. Otávio had then turned his face away, anxious to avoid looking at her. He could love her, he could accept the new and incomprehensible adventure she was offering him, but he continued holding on to the first impulse which had thrown him against her. It was not as a woman, it was not like this, submissive, that he wanted her. He needed her cold and assured, so that he could say as he used to say when he was a little boy, protected and triumphant, "It's not my fault." They would marry, they would see each other at every moment, and he would recognize that she was worse than him, and strong, in order to teach him not to be afraid, not even to be afraid of loving. He wanted her not in order to make a life together, but so that she might allow him to live, to rise above himself, above his past, above the petty villainies which he had committed with cowardice, and to which he was still attached in a cowardly way. Otávio thought that on Joanna's side he would be able to go on sinning. When Otávio had kissed her, he had held her hands, pressing them against his chest. Joanna had bitten her lips, at first enraged because she still didn't know with which thought she should clothe that violent sensation, like a cry surging from her breast and making her feel dizzy. She looked at him without seeing him, her eyes clouded, her body martyred. They had to make their farewell. She withdrew abruptly and went off without turning back, without any nostalgia. Back in her room, lying undressed on the bed, she was unable to sleep. Her body felt oppressive, existed beyond her like some stranger. She felt it throbbing, feverish. She put out the light and closed her eyes. She tried to escape, to sleep, but she lay there for many hours, examining herself, watching the blood creep sluggishly through her veins like an inebriated animal, and thinking how little she had known herself until now. Those light, slender forms, those delicate lines of adolescence, they were opening up, breathing as if they were suffocating and ready to explode. As dawn broke, the gentle breeze caressed her bed and ruffled the curtains. Joanna gradually calmed down. The freshness of early morning consoled her aching body. She was slowly overcome with weariness, and suddenly exhausted, she fell into a deep sleep. She woke up late and felt happy. She imagined that every cell in her body had burst into flower. Miraculously, all her resources of strength were aroused and ready for battle. When she thought of Otávio, she breathed cautiously, as if the atmosphere might be harmful. During the days that followed, she neither saw him nor attempted to see him. She avoided him as if his presence were superfluous, and she was so completely physical that she was pure spirit, incorporeal, incorporeal, whatever. She passed through events and hours, weaving between them with the swiftness of an instant. She scarcely took any nourishment, and her sleep was as tenuous as a veil. She woke up frequently during the night, unconcerned, preparing to smile before giving it any thought. She went back to sleep without changing her position, simply closing her eyes. She often searched for herself without vanity. Her smooth complexion, her bright lips made her turn her back on her image almost out of shame, without the strength to go on confronting that woman's gaze, fresh and moist, so suddenly open and assured. The happiness ceased. Plenitude became sad and oppressive, and Joanna was a cloud ready to turn to rain. She breathed with difficulty as if there were no room inside her for air. She paced up and down, perplexed by the change. How? She asked herself, and felt that she was being ingenuous. Were there two sides to this? Was she suffering for the same reason that had made her terribly happy? She carried her diseased body with her, a troublesome wound by day. Light-heartedness was replaced by gloom and fatigue. Satisfied, an animal that had quenched its thirst, filling its body with water. Yet anxious and unhappy, as if despite everything, there were still lands without water, arid and parched. Above all, she suffered from misunderstanding, alone, dumbfounded, until, leaning her head against the window pane, the street peaceful, the evening drawing in, the world outside there, she felt moisture on her face. She wept freely, as if this were the solution. Large tears ran down her cheeks, without her moving a single facial muscle. She wept so profusely that she couldn't speak. Afterwards, she felt as if she had reverted to her real proportions, tiny, shrunken, humble. Serenely empty, she was prepared. She then looked for him, and her new glory and suffering were now more intense and somehow more unbearable. She got married. Love came to confirm all the familiar things of whose existence she only knew, without ever having accepted and experienced them. The world revolved beneath her feet. There were two sexes among humans. Curse you! A thin line linked hunger to satisfaction, the love of animals. Torrential waters coursed towards the sea. Children were creatures in the process of growing up. In the soil, the bud would transform itself into plant. She would no longer be able to deny what? She asked herself in suspense. The luminous center of things, the affirmation dormant beneath everything, the harmony that existed beneath what she did not understand. She awoke to a new morning, blissfully alive, and her joy was as pure as the sun's reflection on the water. Each event vibrated in her body like little glass needles that were splintering. After some moments, fleeting and profound, she lived tranquilly for a long time, understanding, accepting, resigning herself to everything. It seemed to her that she formed part of the real world, and that she had mysteriously distanced herself from other human beings, notwithstanding that during this period she was able to extend her hand to them, with a fraternity whose vital source could be felt. They spoke to her of their own sorrows, and she, although she might not hear, think, or speak, wore a kind expression, shining and mysterious like that of a pregnant woman. What was happening then? Miraculously, she was alive, relieved of all memories. Her entire past had evaporated, and even the present was one of mists, sweet, fresh mists, separating her from solid reality, preventing her from touching it. Were she to pray, were she to think, it would be to give thanks for having a body made for love. The only truth became that tenderness into which she had sunk. Her face was vague and ill-defined, floating among all the other opaque and confident faces, as if it were not yet able to find support in any expression. Her whole body and soul lost their boundaries. They merged and fused into a single chaos, gentle and amorphous, relaxed and with uncertain movements, like matter that was simply alive. It was perfect renewal, creation, and her union with the earth was so deep and her certainty so firm about what, and that she could now lie without surrendering. All this left her thinking at times, dear God, perhaps I am making more of this than of love. She gradually became accustomed to her new state. She became accustomed to breathing, to living. Little by little, she started becoming older in herself. She opened her eyes, and once more she was a statue, no longer plastic, yet defined. From afar, disquiet with reawakening. At night, between the sheets, the slightest movement or unexpected thought awakened her to herself. Mildly surprised, she opened her eyes wide, perceived her own body plunged into reassuring contentment. She wasn't suffering, but where was she? Joanna, Joanna, she softly called to herself, and her body scarcely responded, quietly echoing, Joanna. The days sped by, and she wished to confront herself more closely. She now summoned herself in a loud voice, and it was not enough that she should be breathing. Happiness was effacing her, effacing her. She now wanted to know herself again, even with sorrow, but she became increasingly submerged. Tomorrow, she put it off. Tomorrow I shall confront myself. But the new day skimmed over her surface, light as a summer evening, barely unsettling her nerves. The only thing she had not got used to was sleeping. Each night, sleep became an adventure, to fall from the effortless clarity in which she lived into mystery itself, somber and fresh, to cross darkness, to die, and to be reborn. And that ends that little vignette or section. Goodbye, Ruff.